Welcome, everyone. We'll give 1 or 2 more minutes just to get a few more people in the door, but welcome to Behind the Scenes of Parental Nutrition Shortages, some of the community efforts. I'm Beth Gore, the CEO of Oley, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We will get started now. I am Beth Gore, the CEO of the Oley Foundation, and welcome today. We're going to be talking about a really important conversation. It's always important in our world, but today especially, behind the scenes of parental nutrition shortages, the community efforts. And we have today with us some representatives from ASPN, which is the American Society of Parental and Enteral Nutrition, EDSA, which is In Drug Shortages Alliance, Angels for Change, and we're hosting this as the Oley Foundation. Next, please. Here's just a couple of housekeeping things just to let everyone know how we're going to do this today as our cameras and microphones are off for the attendees. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. You'll see it at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer as many as we can as time allows. This is being recorded because we want to make this available after on our website at oley.org. Again, the disclaimers, this is for educational purposes. Please do not make changes in your care without seeking guidance from your providers. And some of the opinions expressed are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the representatives of these organizations. So welcome today. Next. I just want to really quickly share this slide. I won't read it to you, but just thank you to Diana, Melissa, and Laura for joining us today on this conversation. The reason I wanted to have this conversation today is there's a lot of shortages that have happened in the parental nutrition world for decades. This isn't something new to us, but what I find is that the conversations are about us, but rarely to us. And so I really wanted to have a conversation saying, one, why is it important? What is happening behind the scenes and what can you do? And so next slide. Those are the objectives for today is why do these keep happening? Not just the current one. What is going on behind the scenes? I know when I started looking, there are a lot of helpers and not everybody knows that. And if I had not been a part of the Oley community behind the scenes, I'd have no clue all the things that happen behind the scenes. And then number three, what can you, no matter who you are in our community, what can you do? So thank you for joining today. I'm really excited to kick this off with our first speaker, who will be representing ASPN today, and that's Diana Mulheron. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much. I am a pharmacist, and so I'm going to be speaking primarily about objective number 1, which is explaining why these shortages occur and why specifically parenteral nutrition is vulnerable to shortages. Next slide, please. So shortages are so common, and IV medications are impacted primarily. They're the biggest risk of all of our medications. It's expensive. It impacts our healthcare, our hospitals, and costs hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And so just from a financial perspective, it is important to hospitals and clinicians, but it also impacts patients, of course. And so it's widespread. Parenteral nutrition is affected commonly. In a 2022 survey, respondents reported 96% of respondents reported that they had experienced shortages of macronutrients for parental nutrition, which included mostly lipids and amino acids. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons why this continues to happen is that if you think about it, every ingredient in a bag of PN, there could be 20 or more ingredients of sterile injectable products in each bag. And every single one of those products is vulnerable to supply disruptions. And I'm saying supply disruptions because in the drug shortage world, we're very careful to say disruptions of supply versus shortage, but ultimately it doesn't really matter, right? Because it matters from a legal perspective and what things can be done in response to supply disruptions, but any supply disruption affects the patient. And so I may say shortage, I may say supply disruption, but what I mean is we can't get the products to our patients. So every one of these ingredients is vulnerable. And this has been the case throughout the entire history of PN, really. So parenteral nutrition was created in 1968. And if you look in the literature, reports of shortages have been in the literature since the 1970s. So essentially the entire time we've ever had PN, we've had shortages of PN ingredients. 2011 was probably the worst year for drug shortages. And so we call it our drug shortage crisis year. And that was a year when over 250 new drug shortages were reported, and that was a record high at the time, and it's still a record high for um, new drug shortages all occurring in one year. It did result in some positive changes, and that has to do a lot with tracking of the FDA and our response, and how that the downstream effect of staying on top of shortages, but it is obviously not always felt by the consumer. So there are positive changes that have happened behind the scenes. Whether you have felt that or not is a different story. So, and here we are in the 2020s, or 2024, and PN shortages continue to occur. Next slide, please. So there's so many reasons for supply disruptions. A common occurrence is quality issues during production. Sometimes production has been discontinued of a certain medication, or drug companies may combine or get sold. And so anytime there's a change in that process, then there can be a significant disruption in supply. Any single ingredient that is involved in the manufacturing process. So I'm talking about inactive ingredients, a cleaning agent to clean the machine that the drug is produced on, a testing agent to confirm sterility or potency of a certain medication that has to be done before the product can leave the manufacturer. If there's a shortage of that, then there is a shortage of that drug product. Anytime there's an equipment upgrade in the drug facility, manufacturing facility, that is downtime for drug production, and so that can lead to shortages. And unfortunately, even some FDA initiatives have led to supply disruptions. So for example, there's a former initiative called the Unapproved Drugs Initiative, where these unapproved drugs that have been around forever, like selenium, ethanol, trace elements, those things, as they became FDA approved, it led to increases in costs for those medications and disruptions to availability for consumers. There's also supply disruptions from things that we're very familiar with at this point, like natural disasters, pandemics, any blocks in transport, loss of staff, a workforce strike. So all of those will lead to disruptions. There's also, of course, not just the medications, but the equipment, any equipment that we use to either compound the drug or administer the drug safely, will ultimately not allow us to be able to receive the medication as patients. Next slide, please. So specific things about PN, other than what I've just described, of why this continues to happen. So number one, there are not many manufacturers of each ingredient that goes into parental nutrition. For example, multivitamins, there's just one that we have in the United States. And so that is going to be a big issue anytime there's a problem with those specific medications. Number two, it is a complex process from the taking all of the ingredients that go into making a drug to actually getting it to pharmacies to be compounded. And so any tiny little issue can lead to significant delays. And then we have limited geographic diversity. So where the locations are, where the drugs are manufactured, where the sources of these materials are coming from, and the ingredients, where those are coming from. And so it's kind of like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket, right? So we need to diversify where all of these things are coming from. And I can say that we know this, and there have been, there are efforts to diversify. And so of these three big things, numbers 1 and 3 are kind of modifiable things that we can do, and those are being done behind the scenes. But again, it just seems like it's not enough, and unfortunately that's kind of where we are right now. I will say that I've described why we have these shortages for PN products, but before I hand it off to Melissa, I will say that there are so many people working behind the scenes to address the situation that we're currently in, and every time there is a shortage. I can personally say that since Hurricane Helene hit and caused destruction in North Carolina, I don't think I have had one day of my career where I have not been working on finding solutions for patients and finding solutions in collaboration with colleagues within Aspen to get information out to providers and clinicians to help guide therapy. And there are Aspen along with hundreds of other key stakeholders like manufacturers, other organizations, are meeting regularly to come up with plans. And it's really a lot of work is going into it. And I've stayed up many nights along with so many other people that I know, trying to come up with safe ways and safe solutions for patients. And I really I really think that a lot of this, as it's coming out, we will hopefully start to see some of the efforts reach the consumers soon. And at this point, I will pass it on to Melissa.
Hi, thank you, Diana. I have the pleasure this morning to join you as a representative of the End Drug Shortages Alliance. My name is Melissa Chase, and I am a pharmacist as well. I'm the director of a children's hospital in California. And part of the hospital, I also have a very active home infusion and home care pharmacy that we support enteral nutrition and parental nutrition in the home. And so I have that lens as well. I'm happy to also let you know that there is a very strong vice chair. Her name is Erin Wright for the Pediatric and Special Populations Committee. And she's from a group purchasing organization, Premier. So we do this in collaboration. I wanted to tell you a little bit about who and what End Drug Shortages Alliance is. So if we go to the next slide. End Drug Shortage Alliances started several years ago with some very visionary, passionate leaders with an established vision to end drug shortages through ensuring access to essential medications and improving quality of life for patients who rely on these medications. The mission of the End Drug Shortage Alliance is that it's an alliance of health system, supply chain, industry, and other stakeholders dedicated to solving pharmaceutical supply challenges by collaborating to increase visibility, access, and advocacy, Collectively, we will end drug shortages through focus on transparency, quality, redundancy, and production of additional supply to achieve measured and sustainable results. How we do this work. Next slide, please. We're divided into 4 different groups that all report up through one board of directors that ties all of us together, but we know that we have to focus in different areas of the supply chain. And so we have a committee dedicated to transparency and redundancy. We have a committee dedicated to quality. We have a committee dedicated to supply readiness. And then the committee that I have the honor to chair is the pediatrics and special populations. In this committee, I want you to know that your CEO, Beth, is an active member of our pediatrics and special populations, and that's how we came to know and work together. In pediatrics and special populations, we have all of the populations represented, including and inclusive of our parental nutrition patients. Next slide, please. Wanted to give you this very busy slide and take a moment just to let you know in images who all is involved, who all is working behind the scenes to end drug shortages. There's currently over 84 member organizations with over 300 active participants. They come from all different areas of the pharmaceutical supply chain. You can see on here USP, you can see the American Society of Health Systems Pharmacy, you see Oley, you see hospitals and health systems, you see pharmaceutical companies, you see universities, group purchasing organizations, distributors like McKesson and Secora. So everybody is now finally working together in one alliance with one goal, that is simply to end drug shortages. So wanted to kind of show you that there's a lot of people working on this. We went over some statistics. I'm going to go over them very briefly, but we did a great job on covering this. And just to show that almost 75% of active drug shortages are sterile injectables, which include parental nutrition products. And since 2010, which we know in 2011 what happened that year, nearly every component involved in the preparation of parental nutrition has experienced a shortage at least once. This is really small, but I did want to show that before Hurricane Helene, we did have one of the first downturns in the number of shortages. We went from about 323 to 300 items. So through some of this work, we are continuing to make progress and hoping to drive down and ultimately end drug shortages for all of us. Next slide. Wanted to talk through a little bit of the impact that you all probably already know so well, but what can drug shortages do? They can delay or compromise therapy. They can lead to medication errors. So when we have to take something that we're not used to working with on our compounder and use it in a different way, or if we have to program compounders, every time that we have changes in those steps or processes, it can lead to medication errors, standardization, and ongoing processes where we have the items that we're used to working with really helps to create safety. It can cause providers to prescribe alternative therapies. Some of them are not, your preferred therapy, or it might be an alternative or secondary therapy, or patients may be required to live in a hospital. These are stories that we've heard in the past. They're stories that we don't want to have to continue to hear ever again. 6-year-olds, 30-year-olds, seniors living in a hospital where infections can be higher. This is not the way that we want to solve this issue or solve this problem. We want to keep patients in their homes. We want to keep kids being able to play. We want to keep adults active in their daily lives. So the impact of bringing home parental nutrition patients into a hospital is felt by everyone. Causes, we've kind of gone over many of them, and then effective management of drug shortages, including parental nutrition components, necessitates a comprehensive plan and the involvement of an interprofessional team. Once the shortage of parental nutrition components demand is resolved, one of the things I wanted to point out is that any and all rationing and conservation of strategies should be halted. We should go back to where we were, what is normal, what is standard, what is the safest regimens for all, and wanting to make sure that we maintain that standard practice for everybody moving forward. So there's a little bit about impact causes and some management. Next slide, please. Wanted to show visually and talk a little bit about the response from End Drug Shortage Alliance. So right after Hurricane Helene hit, that weekend, the organization was very busy getting the information, seeing pictures from the plant as soon as they were able to land by helicopter, and tour on all-terrain vehicles to see what was the status of the bridge, what was the amount of mud and water, what had breached, what had not, what was going to be needed, how long will the plant be down, what were our options. And so working with what we call a rapid response team, they went to work to try and start gathering all recommendations. And those recommendations, as we heard earlier, also included recommendations from Aspen, from American Society of Health and Pharmacy, from the CDC, from the USP. I know a lot of these are abbreviations and a lot of these are acronyms from different organizations, but everybody was working together and trying to put out what mitigation strategies, conservation strategies, and how we would get through this all working together. And so this was rapidly deployed. We had this initial web link up and document available for everyone. Quickly that week, we had a call with End Drug Shortage Alliance, the American Society of Health Systems Pharmacy, and many other hospitals that were able to say what their strategies were, share best practices in order to guide one another in our mitigation and collaboration. And that's exactly what it would take. Behind the scenes of even that and many other of us who have been working day in and day out, we have been advocating. So advocating for special populations, such as our parenteral nutrition patients, advocating for what you're going to hear are allocations and how allocations have kept us safe through shortages, whereas it doesn't allow us or any one group to maybe panic buy or buy more of a market when it's limited. So we really wanted to make sure that everybody had a fair amount of what was in the supply chain. So all of that is happening in that advocacy space. We're advocating with the FDA for flexibilities that we need in the hospitals to be able to make or compound additional products that without those flexibilities, we may not have been able to do. Those were authorized in their COVID pandemic era, and then they were just authorized last Friday. There were text messages right after the announcements Friday of they heard us. Everything we asked for, we got. And so just wanted to kind of share that the FDA is partnering, the FDA is listening, and a lot of that work is happening through our rapid response team, our committee chairs, our advocacy, and your voices being heard. And again, we are so grateful for Beth participating with us on the pediatrics and special populations. I think I have one more slide and turning it over to Laura. This is just a summary slide of some of the activities and projects that we've been working on, and you can certainly see support for parenteral nutrition and other special populations is top of mind. Next slide, Laura, take it away.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Bray. I'm Chief Changemaker at Angels for Change. If you want to do the next slide. Angels for Change is the nation's only patient advocacy nonprofit with a mission to end drug shortages. We also run a drug shortage crisis line that anyone, a patient, physician, pharmacist, a hospital, a facility can call, supply chain members sometimes call too, in the middle of a disruption, a scarce event, meaning you can't get supply or they can't get supply for you. And we work with a global supply sharing network to make sure the supply's in the right place at the right time. We're doing this proactively and reactively every day. So in case you didn't know, this is a space for you. And I founded Angels for Change 5 years ago after my own child faced 3 life-saving drug shortages during her pediatric cancer diagnosis. And as a caregiver and her as the patient, there really was no space for us as patients to go, no one to help us navigate a drug shortage, no place to help figure out what's going on in the drug shortage so that we could get back on care. And so that's who we are, Angels for Change. And when people have been talking about behind the scenes, Angels for Change is founding co-founder of the End Drug Shortages Alliance. I'm also a board member of the EDSA and a committee member. And I've been working with Oley and Foundation and Beth for 2 years, specifically on vulnerable drugs and vulnerable patients, which TPN and your population is one. So I want to share a little bit about drug shortages just to level set it. And then we'll go in and use what's happening right now as an example, and then kind of talk about where do we go from here. So what is drug shortage? Diana kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that there's different definitions and what does that mean? But basically a shortage is when supply doesn't meet demand. That's what a shortage is. But there are different definitions, and those different definitions lead to different tools that can be used within the supply chain. And sometimes this is hard to see and hard to understand. So ASHP will report a drug shortage in their database, which is a great resource whenever supply levels go down. If supply changes, they report it. So it may report a shortage for a specific region or one NDC because it was, decreased by 3%, but that didn't necessarily create a huge disruption in the market. FDA is going to report it when supply is less than what we use as a nation. And so that's why the FDA reports a shortage differently, but they also have a drug shortage database that has really great information as a consumer, as a patient trying to figure out what to do. Angels for Change, as the patient advocacy organization, when supply chain disruption causes patient impact, it is time for us to step into action. So very similar to how Diana and Aspen defined it, right? If there's a disruption and a patient their frontline care is being impacted, then we think that it is a right for us to advocate to have our frontline care and for the supply chain to be the one that changes to ensure that we get our care. And that is what we do at Angels for Change. So if you are having patient impact during a disruption, we're here to advocate on your behalf. We're here to activate our global supply sharing network, and our drug shortage crisis line is there for you. But I want to make one huge, make sure everybody knows that a shortage is not an outage. And this is hard sometimes because supply decreasing does not necessarily mean we're not going to get what we need on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And it can cause the market, both patients but also purchasers, to make changes to their historical use, which can lead to outages. And so what that really means, and Melissa so lovely talked about it first, it's panic buying. We want to work through a shortage where there is a disruption together as an entire supply chain, one day, 1 week, 1 month, one medicine if we need to at a time, to make sure everyone gets care. And that is always our goal at Angels for Change. And that includes this shortage. We are currently in a space where if we are looking at this week and next week, we should all be able to keep moving forward in care. So let's talk about that. The next slide. What is actually the Baxter shortage? What is this IV shortage of 2024? Quick level set. Baxter North Cove facility was impacted about almost 3 weeks ago now by Hurricane Helene. And they sent out a press release and made this public immediately with really great, a really great communication strategy. I want to let you know that before the hurricane came, FEMA, if you didn't know, FEMA and Baxter were in that facility moving all of their supply up, so that even though the facility did have flooding, the supply that had already been finished was up and was not impacted. But they couldn't just get it right away, right? Because there was a national, not just a natural disaster, but a national disaster happening, and there was a bridge that had washed out. This one challenge, though, is that this facility produces 50% or more of the U.S. pop supply for seven medicines, right? So that's another thing that I want, like some of the things say 90% of all IV solutions and 90%, there's 124 NDC. Okay, so I want to make sure I went through the entire product list. So with the rapid response team, because I'm on it, there are only 14 medicines there that Baxter has more than a 15% market share, and only 7 that they had more than a 50%. So first, it's not nothing. It is something. There are 7 medicines that are really big and impactful. But that's not 124. I saw that in writing. I saw 74. So just that makes, maybe makes you feel a little bit. And know that the FDA has called those medicines, those 7 medicines, short. They have been issued as an FDA shortage. So that's some quick level setting. We'll move to the next slide. So what is being done? What does that mean now for you? Why do you care? Well, from the beginning, as Diana and Beth and Melissa have said, ASPR, which is the administration, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, the FDA, FEMA, Baxter, and the entire supply chain have been working on trying to figure out how to get supply back into levels that everyone can keep share from the beginning. And Baxter has stated that they believe that they will be partially operational by end of year. So we're talking about maybe a 3-month, disruption there. Allocations, and Melissa mentioned allocations. This is when the manufacturer or the distributor slows down purchasing so that we know where supply is and we don't potentially have supply in the wrong place because it was bought by a handful of purchasers. So allocations were added to medicines, not just these medicines, but medicines throughout the supply chain to slow down. Many of those allocations were at 150%, which means you could still buy more than you had historically, but you couldn't buy 400 times that you've bought. And some of them are at 100%. And some, as you know, these 7 medicines that are short, some of them are at 60%. But I want to remind you that that's 60% of Baxter's supply. There are other manufacturers that supply, and B. Braun, Fresenius Kabi, ICU, they are there. They put allocations in place so that at 100 or 120% to their customers, but they are also increasing their supply to make up some of the gap. Melissa mentioned 503B and the work that's been happening, and 503A compounding with FDA to be able to increase supply there. And then I mentioned we have our drug shortage crisis line, which is open to anybody to email or call or social media and say we need help. So what should you do? First and foremost, every single one of us need to be good stewards of the supply that's available. Baxter was a major contributor of the market, but they're not the only contributor of this market. And them having a disruption is serious. but we need to make sure we're taking this one step at a time, 1 week at a time, and we need to be looking at supply and as in its totality to share with everybody. So if, when you're buying, can you stick to what your historical use is? And if you get supply and allocation from one member of the supply chain, and then you're able to find some from another member of the supply chain, please don't buy more than you need for the next week or two of patients. And same thing, if you're a patient, if you have a script of, maybe you're getting it typically 90 days or 60 days, 30 days, are you able to think about, staying just at that 30-day? That's, changing your time limits so that we can share the supply, because supply is continuing to come and be shipped. It's not an outage. There is a shortage. Another one is low waste protocols and conservation. This means if you can have something orally, then you can have it in another presentation. If you can switch to a suitable alternative where there exists, if make sure you don't waste a drop of it, if you can, and where you can, we should all be doing that. Historically, when we move to low waste protocols, suitable alternatives, and conservation, these are all still frontline care changes we're still talking about. We can decrease the waste to almost 20% of what supply is. And when you're thinking about there being a supply gap of 50% or 40%, just low waste can get us really close to being sure we have enough for everybody. This is, shift your time frames, not necessarily your care. Shift to alternatives, but not frontline care. Stay informed, like meetings like this, and you can call Angels for Change anytime. Beth as a resource on the End Drug Shortages Alliance, and I think Diana mentioned the drug shortage database, ASHP, and there are some really great resources out there. Stay informed so that you know how you can advocate for yourself, because that's the key. I'm telling you, Angels for Change is telling you, I would like you to try to advocate for standard of care. And that means, what do you need this week to move forward? And if that is something that now, after low waste, after, suitable alternatives, but if you do have some things where you are concerned about your standard of care, you are facing something like both Diana and Melissa talked about, having to be in a hospital to get care, we would like for the supply chain to find that supply for you, for your physician, for your pharmacist, in the available emergency supply, and not change your standard of care. So that's call on advocates when advocating for yourself is not working, and you can always call Angels for Change. Next slide. Now, why does this keep happening? So Diana did a really great job of mentioning like the market and the PN market, but the reality is the majority of shortages are in generic sterile injectables. They're essential medicines that are very inexpensive. So last year, the majority of shortages, 75% were generics, and almost 100% of those generics cost less than $20. And so when we're talking about these complex medicines, and they're very inexpensive, 50% were less than $1 a unit. And so when we're talking about these complex medicines that save our lives, and the price is so low, it leads to lack of incentives to make sure we're ready to supply them. And so we need to change the environment a little bit. So what do we need to do? That's the last slide that I brought, which is how are we gonna move forward? Well, I'm gonna be honest. If your pharmacy or hospital had supply at B. Braun or Fresenius Kabi, they're not really impacted right now. So where we are seeing the biggest challenges is where there's a facility that had 100% of their supply from Baxter, right? Because they were completely reliant on one manufacturer for all of these medicines. And while we think that Baxter is an amazing organization, we're so thankful to work with them every day and they save lives, we should be multi-sourcing our supply, and we should have more buffer supply. And that's the kind of things we need to be changing in the future. If we had 3 weeks, just 3 weeks supply on hand, and there was 3 manufacturers we were buying from, we would all around the US, we would be in a different place right now. We do need to do proactive work with 503B so that they're ready to supply these, not just running reactively when we get into a problem. And Angels for Change has a project called Project Protect that is working on that. We need to really talk about stewardship of supply and best practices every single day, all the time. And one thing I throw out that sometimes seems radical is we think out of allocation as a bad word because we only use it when bad things happen. But like, what if we had a say that like some of these medicines are too important for us to go without? And so along with multi-sourcing and buffer supply, every essential medicine is always on 150% of allocation, which means you can order what you always ordered plus 50% more, but you can't order more. And that would be, because sometimes during the shortages, and this did happen here, and the one day from when the news hit that Baxter was harmed and we worked as a supply chain to put allocations on, we lost days and days and days of supply. And we see that over and over again. Last year when a tornado hit a Pfizer plant, in the 16 hours from when it hit the plant and all the allocations were put in place, our country lost 8.75 days of supply from our distribution centers. And the hurricane hit at 5 p.m. So in 3 business hours, Pfizer hadn't even been in the plant. No one knew what was impacted, but this reaction to buy does create some of these challenges during a shortage time. We need to remove access barriers from patients to getting supply. And one of those is ensuring that any suitable alternative is covered by your insurance carrier during a time of drug shortage. Because sometimes there are suitable alternatives that have no compromise, but you're not getting access to it because of some sort of barrier, formulary barrier at your insurance. And that just needs to go away. And then in the end, I want you to know the path forward, we're here for you. If all of those things fail and you still aren't getting your medicine, please reach out to us. This is what we do. This is how we help build the supply chain of the future, is by making the supply chain meet your needs during a disruption. So that's it. You're not alone. Call us. That's my email. Laura Bray at angelsforchange.org. Angelsforchange.org is our website. You can click on it. You can go to social media and say, I need help. You can send me a direct message. You can call my cell. It's all public information. You are not alone. I can never promise that I can do more, but usually we figure it out together. Right. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Diana, Melissa, and Laura to share those things. And I could share some things from Oley's perspective. Elaine, if you just put that first slide up with all 3 there, is while I talk just really quickly. And then what I really want to do is get to their questions in a panel format. So again, we are working behind the scenes. We have not been super verbal talking to people and our community. We've been working really hard behind the scenes. So just a really quick version is Oley's strategic plan has advocacy as one of our 4 pillars. And the way we define advocacy is to be the voice to, of, and for those on nutrition support. And so right now, this is what we're doing here is the 2. We're trying to take a message that was very complex and is very difficult and navigate it well and talk to you directly. We're doing some other resources behind the scenes that we'll talk about in just a second here. But we're also working towards not just the short term, but the long term solutions to these things. We keep ending up here, we keep being vulnerable. And so we are actively collaborating with lots of organizations of all sorts of acronyms that you've heard of and never heard of before to try to say not just stabilize now, but in the future. So just realize that even though we're not saying a lot directly to you at this moment, it's because we are really, really busy working collaboratively with all of these organizations represented here today and many, many more along the supply chain for the short term, what we're happening right now, but also for the long term. And so again, we're working on some ongoing efforts, and then we want to empower you to do so. Elena, if you'd slip to the very last slide, what I want to do is pull up some of the questions that were already asked. I'm going to address a couple as quickly as I can and throw some out. How do you suggest I advocate directly to the FDA? We'll have that on the chat that we can make sure that you guys do that. You can also directly report straight to Angels for Change. You can also go to our website at info or email us at info@oley.org. There's a lot of ways that you can report this, and all streams lead directly to the FDA. If you feel like you've been harmed or there's a medication error, please go to ismp.org, and they are Institute for Safe Medical Practices, and they also have a reporting mechanism which also goes directly to the FDA as well. All streams lead there. It's really more a matter of who all do you want to know along the way, and we will continue to update our website. It's really rough right now, but we're trying to put things on there as fast as possible on our website about shortages. If you go to oley.org, you can see on there it says advocacy, and one of the first ones on there, I think it's the second one down, says shortages. So somebody asked on here about the IV hydration spas, and it's a really long question, but what I can tell you is myself, I've personally heard from the distributors and manufacturers, they immediately put a stoppage to almost every single one of those resources. And so I can tell you, I have heard repeatedly that that is what they've done. We've even asked directly the FDA if they could do that at all times of shortage, could they mandatory do that? And they're looking into that as well. I saw Laura give a thumbs up, but if they have supply, it's because they had stock up supply. They are not getting new sources of that. Do you agree with that, Laura?
100%. So Baxter also put that in right away. I've talked to the other manufacturers, they put that in. I've talked to the distributors. But the thing is, these medicines are inexpensive, right? And a med spa, they make a lot of money. And so it's very likely they have stocked up. The other thing is there are other presentations. And so one of the things that's why we advocated for allocations on all kinds of presentations, but they still would be able to get their other presentations at their historical purchasing. And, that is something that, that is where Beth and, people talking about making sure that they don't get any. I know at the distributors, they have them locked down.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Too.
Thank you. And I felt really amazed that they did that immediately, very proactively without being told they had to. So just know that this is a conversation. Also, Oley's been a part of a lot of conversations. What can we do about shutting this down all the time? But that's another whole story because we live in capitalism. But there's a question on here that says, why can't I provide PM for my home start PN patients versus having to admit them? Why in the 21st century do not have enough vital PN ingredients for patients whose lives depend on them, period? I don't know how to answer that question, but can we discuss that for a second? Anybody?
Sure. So what?
Why can't they they can't even start a new patient at home. They have to admit people right now and these kind of things. What can we do about this proactively to make sure we don't end up here again?
Their traditional supply they're getting zero, is what you're saying? That the person who asked, you're getting zero, you're not even getting your allocation?
New start. No, because, well, what I can tell you is, so if you're a Baxter company right now, supplier, and you immediately got moved to 50% allocation, so you have your own stock plus 50, but you don't have more supply than the patients that you're getting. What I'm finding, and I'm going to poke some bears right here and stir the pot a teeny bit. Sorry, guys. Is in the rationing and conservation. I believe that this is me, Beth, only Beth, not Oley. I believe that there's a lot of hospital waste. There's a lot of waste in a lot of pieces of healthcare. You guys have all seen it yourselves, right? There's only so much belt tightening that can be done. So if I have 100 patients and I have 100% of allocation that I need in order to supply those for those patients, all of a sudden I have only 50%. I might be able to wean a couple people off, but I'm not going to be able to make up for the 50%. And even when they started to move it back to 60 and 90%, what's happening is the rationing and conservation. When you said earlier not to change the standard of care, that starts to get into, and I don't want to get into like what you should be not doing and how to prescribe, but patients are, we're seeing routinely going from like 7 to 3 days almost immediately. And what we don't know is that okay? I actually put this out to Laura last night in an email of frustration. That is, how do, if this was a cancer patient and they were supposed to get 7 days of chemo, but they only get 3, how will that impact them? Nobody knows. Well, it's this is not the same for, parenteral nutrition and things like that, but that's the rationing that we're seeing. I
So
don't
those
know
are
that
the
anybody has the answer, but I want to raise the question.
Well, so those are the things that we want to be able to be advocating for, right? If someone is not getting at least their 60% allocation, we need to know that. If they're getting stopped totally for care, we need to know that because there is emergency supply. There is. We need to make sure that supply is being shared in the places that most need it. And if you don't reach out and we don't let the FDA know that this population is being rationed in this way, which is different than like there are many spaces right now that are at completely normal operations. So that's what we need to know. That's why we have a global supply sharing network. That's why we talk to the FDA. That's why we have some emergency supply. So reach out to us. And if it's maybe it's one distributor who had 100% purchasing with Baxter, and for 10 days they were down to 10% allocation, and we've got to figure out how to get that distributor and its facilities back to a place within a timeline that's appropriate, right? So like those are the things that we want to know. You need to send those things to Angels for Change so we can figure out, okay, why is there rationing down? Or if you get a cluster, that's another thing, right? All of a sudden you get a whole bunch of people that now come and that doesn't fit your allocations. Instead of turning them away, let's advocate for additional future allocations for that new cluster. And it may be a pause. It may not work for 2 weeks, but we can put those patients in the rotation of allocations and we can work out and figure out how to do this. And we do have some emergency supply. So that's what we want to know.
So Oley's going to, I see Diana and Melissa, I'll come to you. Oley will put out some more things that if people are having, these kind of rationings, which we're seeing, is that we will have one specific place to make sure everybody sends us because it is happening quite a bit across the country. Diana?
But if it's just that you want more supply, or like if there is an alternative, a suitable alternative, please be good stewards of that supply versus this going down.
What I'm saying is it's the patients. We don't have any stewardship over any supply. We're saying I normally get 7 days and now I'm getting 3 days. I have no stewardship of that. We're just the last of the stop saying it's happening and we're being told that it's not happening and yet it is. So really I'm talking about the suppliers. There's someone here. So that for you guys and the clinicians, please do a really, really good job. But the patients, it's happening to us and nobody knows.
Well, that's what we want. And then we reach out and say a patient has let us know, and we go through that entire supply chain. We've been notified, our drug shortage crisis has been notified that you are currently rationing patients. Can we talk about what your current days on hand and what your situation is? And then we go through their supply chain to figure out how we are figuring out how to get all of those patients to what is some level of normalcy, right?
So expect to get inundated. Diana?
It's definitely happening. It was like the first thing that we heard was happening. And I think that a couple of things. I think pharmacies have had to make, unfortunately, some like knee-jerk reactions to an impending disaster. And so that is like the easiest thing and the first thing that happened. And it's not easy, obviously, and it is often not the correct thing to do or the standard of practice, because patients rely on this for, to live.
And
Another thing is that that's one thing that Aspen has been working on. For all shortages of PN ingredients, Aspen has shortage recommendations for clinicians, and those are getting updated. And also we've created a couple that are going to be released very soon, any day, hopefully, for sterile water and dextrose. And so rather than going straight to rationing the full PN bags for patients, we've kind of described some alternative steps before that has to happen. But even outside of these shortages, Aspen has and it's free to anyone. You can go on there yourself, nutritioncare.org, and go to their shortages website and access these resources. And you can share them with your pharmacy if they are not aware of them. And I would encourage you to do that, because I imagine that a lot of pharmacies are not aware of this. And share with your clinicians who are managing your PN if you're not getting the standard of care.
See your hand up and I'll come back to you, Laura.
So I just wanted to kind of let you know a little bit of what we've been doing through the End Drug Shortage Alliance and Pediatrics and Special Populations. Is there's been additional conversations with Quorum this last week. There's been additional conversations with Option Care and several of the other larger across the United States home infusion, home health, parenteral nutrition suppliers. There's been some business decisions. I think, Beth, you might be alluding to that as to like, we're just not going to take new patients. So part of it has to do with allocations. And so part of it is making sure that the allocations go with the patient. So if I have the patient in the hospital and the best place for them is to be in the home, and I get resistance on discharge planning, that that would be a new patient for us. Right now, we've made a business decision to do this, and said, well, what if I work with, and I ask them, who is your distributor? Oh, it's McKesson. Okay. What if we worked with McKesson? And I'm telling you a true reality story, because McKesson is very good at doing this, and Laura knows, because this is part of the advocacy that we've done, is that allocation needs to move with the patient. So if the patient needs to be in the home and there's this resistance or a business decision and we can get them the allocation, they have no other reason than to say why they're not going to accept that patient. So part of it is the discussion. So we ran into this in Phoenix, Arizona first, where they had two patients that Phoenix doesn't have, like I do, a children's hospital-based home infusion. They're dependent on community resources. And they had said no, they weren't taking those patients. And through advocacy, discussions, moving allocations, and continuing the dialogue, they were able to get those patients home. But there's also additional conversations around business models and leaving the parenteral nutrition space altogether. Many of you know that we're advocating with Quorum, and so there's some other conversations and other opportunities that we're looking at as other disruptions face our patients. So we're here to work in all kinds of different ways. And that's just one.
Melissa is 100% right. And we can't have those conversations if we don't know they're happening, and we can't identify where the block is. And if the block truly is a business decision and there's no way with an EDSA or Angels for Change to remove it, this is when Angels for Change, as the patient advocacy organization, goes to the FDA and the White House and says, we have X amount of patients getting this pushback. We need to figure out some solution for them, which can be one of 1,000 things. The FDA needs to bring in additional importation. You need to give additional emergency supply. So I could, we need to have the, but if we don't know they're happening, to be able to have the first conversation, which we're really good at Angels for Change and EDSA figuring out solutions, if we don't have that first cut, we can't figure out where there's potential pockets that people are falling through.
So thank you. And I'm just going to do a really quick thing it's the top of the hour. And if anybody needs to step off, I'm going to do a real quick wrap up here. If any of the speakers can stay and if any of the people want to stay on, we're going to stay on for 15 extra minutes. That's the max we'll do. But I do want to say connect with Oley if you want to submit to speak. Please do so by 9/11/1. We're welcoming anybody to speak on all sorts of topics, including shortages, which would be an interesting one. Please submit any content that you have for our quarterly newsletter. Please send us your patient stories at info@oley.org. And then obviously, please connect any clinicians and patients with Oley. It's always free to join. I want to go back to, and if you need any of the speakers or the patients need to jump off, or participants need to jump off, please do. I want to respect everybody's time, but there's quite a few other questions on here, trying to get to the heart of a couple of things. So thank you for your extra time. Really, there's a question about an ethical dilemma. That's one of the questions on here that says, if times get that tight, are we ever getting to the point where they have to choose who gets PN, either whether in or out of the hospital? That's one of the questions on here. I paraphrased it a little bit, but how do you get to an ethical dilemma of who gets PN and who doesn't? Anybody want to touch that one?
Well, at Angels
think
for
I can help.
Change, our
Go ahead.
perspective is that's the job of the FDA to increase supply for us, and they have tools around the world to be able to do that. And so we need to, and we work with all the different manufacturers to see where there is emergency supply. And when we get to that place where there's not going to be any emergency supply, then that's when those levers need to be pulled more. They already have authorized five different facilities are bringing in supply. It should be here in 3 weeks. But if we need more than that, it's not the patient that should bear that burden. That is what we advocate for. And since we founded, we've been pretty good, including last year's dire chemotherapy shortages, which had there was supposed to be 500,000 people who weren't going to get served and helped, but 100% of people who called Angels for Change and EDSA were able to get back on treatment. So, with the help of the FDA and the White House and all of the manufacturers and all the patient advocacy organizations. But that's my perspective. We shouldn't be getting there. You need to call us before you're getting there, because we need to make sure the supply's in the right place at the right time. Sorry, Melissa, jump in.
Okay. I can just give a little bit of perspective of within those first couple of days. When you really are in a hospital incident command system, command and control, trying to find out what you have a day and a half left of product. The orders are all canceled for 48 hours. You're calling, neighboring organizations. Everybody's kind of rationing at that point and not sure about sharing. I am the co-chair of our ethics committee along with one of our physicians. And so we do engage ethics. And I think it's appropriate at times when you need to make those clinical decisions with what you have immediately in front of you, whether that's for the next hour, for the next, 24 hours. It's appropriate. And it's what ethics committees of hospitals and organizations are there for. That being said, we also don't want to get into those situations and scenarios. But what we go down to is who needs what at the moment and what is the next patient. And so one of the things that we did was, it's also along the lines of reducing waste. So we have been compounding overnight parenteral nutrition bags just to be ready for a baby to be born. And those only have a certain number of days that they're available in the refrigerator. And if a baby's not born, then we don't use them. And so we decided that we weren't going to make parenteral nutrition overnight bags. That saved us empty bags, saved us sterile water, saved us dextrose. But we did have dextrose 10%, and it was immediately available. And then we took those bags of 250 mLs and made 50 ml syringes so that 5 babies could have D10 in 50 mLs. So you started with ethics. There are times when we do call in our ethics council and committees and get the strategies around particular uses of particular products in particular times, but hopefully never last long. And then you do have to get strategic.
Thank you for that Thank you for those answers. I think it's interesting to know. I will be more proactive in making sure that as I hear that people are having these severe, in my opinion, rationing and conservation, that we will pass those along very proactively. There's a couple questions I'm not going to address right now, but I want to put it out there, is that I think we need this as an article at some point if anybody wants to do this. Is it was referenced twice about 2011, what happened in 2011. Let's not answer that right this second, but we do need to have that. What did happen? What lessons were learned from 2011? And then what can we do going forward, I think is an interesting one. And then a couple of questions on like what's a 503A and B. That's beyond the scope right now in this opinion. We were throwing out terms that not everybody uses, but I do think that it's important to understand, but not necessarily at this moment. But we will put some information out there. I think this is a provider. It says not being able to accept new patients is affecting all home infusion companies, not just the large companies. This is not a business decision, but truly not having enough product for the existing and new patients. And the question goes on about how allocations and other things, but I just want to leave that as an open question. That's a statement right there. This isn't just a business decision, but they actually do not have the product. Call Angels for Change. Is that what you're saying?
That's that. I mean, we're helping people every day who are in that challenge, whether it's a hospital or a fusion, and that we are now. Don't expect to get what, like, we will help. What is the gap that you are not
Today.
able to cover? And we can get you emergency supply for this week while we work with figuring out how to help those going forward. And what we find, I'm going to tell you what I find, not just in this shortage, but in every shortage, is that sometimes all a facility needs is a 3-day gap and a promise from somebody that if they get into that problem again, they can get another 3-day emergency supply, and it can keep them running forward. And so that's what I have found. I mean, Melissa, right? The fact that, if you run into something, you can call me and I can get you a 3-day emergency gap in 48 hours. Right? It helps. Yes.
It helps. We have had the experience in the chemotherapy realm of being able to keep a patient on therapy where the drug was located in Philadelphia and it got all the way to California. But I can also tell you that Angels for Change is tough. Laura's got thick skin. She's going to ask you where, she's going to actually go to your group purchasing organization. She's going to go to your distribution center. She's going to find out what you've been purchasing. She's going to find out, is this real or not? And she will make sure that you're doing what you need to be doing in order to conserve and be appropriate with supply, in order to say, no, you can't take any more patients. So if you've done all of those things, then she's like,
I am going to make sure
there's
not supply sitting on your shelf either, right? How many days on hand do you have? Wait. No. Like those. Yes. So thanks for, yes, everybody. We are collaborating with everyone, but we are really good at making sure we can keep getting people by if we do that kind of stewardship. So thanks, Melissa.
So there's, and I will not use names today, I can't. There is a large PN company that originally said that they were getting out of the space. There's rumors they may or may not now, just hint. I'm not able to make a statement about that, but there are also other companies who have chosen, for a lot of different reasons, like one recently stopped taking most pediatric patients. All of these things are a symptom of a much bigger problem, which is what we really need to get to. We need to get through the short term. We need to get to the long term and things like that. But in the short term, if you are stuck at the hospital, if you are somebody who knows somebody who's getting stuck at the hospital, that there's no one who will take you either back or as a new, please reach out. We are going to connect. We can connect with the EDSA and Angels for Change and all the different things. We can talk to a couple groups, but This should start to be a little bit better is what I'm being told. But if you're the one being stuck, it doesn't matter if you're the only one on the planet, it's still affecting you. And so we're not just about the big numbers, and neither is Laura. She will go after not just the big old, plants, but she'll go after the one. She was the one. She was the one who needed that one next drug for that one kid that was her own child. So she gets this. And so if you're the one sitting at the hospital and no one will take you on, please let us know. And I can't promise that we will fix it. What I can promise you is we'll try. We will do our absolute best to figure this out. We have connections, and one at a time, we're going to figure this out. As dramatic as this sounds, I feel like in some ways over the last couple of weeks we've been on, I'll try not to be emotional. We've been on the Titanic, and I'm just trying to put as many people on lifeboats as I possibly can. I did not expect to get. This has been really, really hard, but we're trying to put every single person on a lifeboat that we possibly can. Also, bigger picture, and where I want to go next is I really, really need us to the last few minutes is what can we do in the next couple of days, weeks, months after we're all on a lifeboat? How can we stop getting ourselves on the Titanic? That's what keeps happening. How do we, and I'd like each one of you to figure out if you have anything that you would like to say as wrap up, and then how do we stop ending up in this position? What can Oley do? How can Oley use our voice? And I'll start with Diana first. What do you have any thoughts on what we can do proactively together as a community?
So this is my initial thought is something I'm passionate about is improving clinician education in nutrition support. So I think a lot of, from my perspective, I'm more inpatient and kind of thinking about educating clinicians. I think having the knowledge of what your decisions are when you're rationing and you go from 7 days of multivitamins to 3 days of multivitamins and you think that's okay for patients, or you go from 7 days of PN to 3 days of PN just because that was an easy decision in a very hard situation, right? But knowing what the end result is and the harm that it will cause patients, I think is powerful. And I don't know, even though we might know how to write a PN order or what goes in the PN or proper dosing, we may not understand the clinical impact that has on our patients. And so from my perspective, that's where my passion falls, is trying to just increase education and awareness for clinicians and know what standard of practice is. Go to Aspen, look look at the guidelines, look at the recommendations, and know that material for your patients.
Thank you for sharing that. And Oley, I can say officially, Oley would love to participate and collaborate on those kind of projects going forward from the patient perspective. Melissa, what's your thought on this?
So from a health system perspective, you've heard a lot about pharmaceutical waste and appropriate use of the supply chain and appropriate purchasing patterns. And so we're working on that space and ensuring transparency around who is purchasing, where is the product. But we also are continuing to work on an area where we can have additional, I'm going to use air quotes, manufacturing in the United States. And some of that is around what we'll talk about in the future around 503B, which is a pharmacy that can make drug without a prescription versus a 503A that has to have a prescription. So that's the easiest way to define those. So continuing to work on having alternative sources within our supply chain, something that is within the United States, but we're never going to be able to control Mother Nature. And so having not all your eggs in one basket, being able to continue to keep other organizations making product. So Diana mentioned multivitamins is only made by one. So how do we incentivize some other company to make that so that there is some duplication in the supply chain that adds to resources so that we have that for moving forward. So the last thing I can say is advocacy. advocacy for patients who don't have the strongest voices. So we feel like adult populations have a very strong voice, so we're continuing to advocate. I know it just says peds and special populations, but it's all of the special populations, whether it is a dialysis patient or a chemotherapy patient or parenteral nutrition, enteral nutrition patients that we're talking about today. Those making sure that they have a voice and that they are heard and that their needs are met, and not just that they're a smaller portion of the supply chain.
Thank you so much. And then Laura, thought on this?
Yeah, so I think the two easiest answers are join the EDSA. The work that we're doing there is remarkable. It is the entire supply chain. It does include patient advocacy and all members. You know, we've got to do that work as an organization. The second easy one is share your stories. Patient stories matter, and they do make change. And then the third one is there's actually a Senate Finance Committee draft bill that specifically takes aim at the generic injectable market and its in sustainability. If you want to know when it's ready to get voted on and want to tell your senators to vote on it, I'd be happy to give you that kind of information as well.
For sure. Yeah, we want to aim, and thank you again for all those who have attended, and thank you to our speakers for presenting this today. It's a hard conversation, but one I feel like we need to have. This is not the end of this conversation. This is truly the beginning. I definitely want to make sure that we have some things on our website. So go to our website. We will continue to put some of these resources that were talked about today on there. And most importantly, if you are personally being affected, we need to know. That's the bottom line. Even if you are like, you'll be fine. We need to know. Let them sort it out. We don't have to sort out whether this is legit or not. That's somebody else's job. Just tell us the story. So please connect with us. Please let us know what's going on in your world. And worst case scenario, info@oley.org, and we will plug you in to where you need to go. This webinar will go up on our website along with the resources that we've got going. I would love to continue this much, much longer, but thank you so much for coming today. And please join us in this fight as we go forward. Oley's here with you. Thanks, everyone.